Shana Tova. Thank you for joining us here for Rosh HaShanah. I want to tell you an interesting fact, that for time immemorial, or at least until the year 1697, everybody in Europe thought that all swans were white. For thousands of years, Europeans would use the term black swan in the same way that we use the term when pigs fly to describe something that is utterly impossible. That was until January 10th, 1697, when the Dutch explorer Willem de Vlaming arrived on the Swan River in Western Australia, and he became the very first person from the Old World to observe an actual black swan. Suddenly, the definition of what was previously thought to be impossible became possible. What had been impossible was simply something that had never been observed before in history. Just a few years ago, in 2007, the Lebanese-born economist Nassim Taleb wrote the best-selling book Black Swan. This book talks about the huge impact of events that had never been imagined as the world headed toward them, and it was only after the fact that these events seemed predictable. A black swan event is what Taleb describes as having three qualities: rarity, extreme impact, and it is only predictable when looking backwards and not forwards. Black swan events. An event that can't be predicted beforehand. It can only be explained after the fact, and it completely changes the course of history. In other words, it is the story of the Jewish people. Our story, the story of the Jewish people, you could say is a 3,000-year history of one black swan event after another. In fact, you could say that we are the people of the black swan. Sometimes the black swan events that take place in the story of the Jewish people are events that happen to us. The destruction of the Second Temple, for example, or in many of our lifetimes, the fall of the Soviet Union. At other times, we, the Jews, have been the catalyst or the primary actor in a black swan event, such as the printing of the Talmud or the creation of the State of Israel. In retrospect, these events all seemed inevitable, but moving forward, they couldn't have been predicted. The story of the Jewish people is a story of constant adaptability. Bechol dor vador, like we say on the night of Passover. In each and every generation, we have to face a black swan event. And in each and every generation, we find new and different ways that we are going to adapt. It reminds me of the old story. God announces loudly that he is rescinding Noah's covenant, and in 3 days, a great flood will engulf all life on earth. Leaders of the world's religions stand before their flocks to offer some last words of hope. Pope Francis and all of the other Christian leaders announce, "Repent your sins, accept Jesus, and we will meet in the next world." The Dalai Lama announces to the world, "Meditate for unity, and we shall all reach nirvana together." The leading rabbi of the day stands up and says, "Yidden, fellow Jews, no, we can't waste time. We have only 3 days to learn how to live underwater." The last 6 months have been devastating. Not only has there been the tragic loss of life, of hundreds of thousands of deaths in our country alone, but there is this fear that permeates and pervades all that we do. We have gone 6 months without the simple pleasures that we took for granted before March. The embrace of relatives, a coffee with friends, face-to-face conversations. We cannot paper over or ignore these losses. But there have been silver linings also. And it is possible for gratitude and grief to live side by side. One silver lining that I've witnessed has been that in these last 6 months, I have never seen more Jewish innovation in such a short period of time. Here at Beth Shalom, we reinvented everything that we did within 72 hours. To paraphrase the joke about the flood, we learned how to live underwater. Now, the author of the book Black Swan, he himself argues that the coronavirus is actually not a black swan. It's actually a white swan because Bill Gates predicted something like this 5 years ago. Well, let me tell you, I'm not Bill Gates. And this pandemic was as much of a black swan as I have ever lived through. And from the moment that we were told that we couldn't meet in person, we figured out different ways that we could connect with each other digitally, and then in socially distant ways. We also created digital ways of doing old things. We began offering new ways to learn Torah, new ways to connect with each other. And we have done things that we had never done before. We created phone trees, reaching out to all the elderly and the isolated. We hosted long-distance dialogues with interfaith thought leaders on Facebook Live. We learned how to cook our favorite recipes in different people's kitchens, each in our own homes. And I am proud of what Beth Shalom has done and what we continue to do. But we're not unique. These innovations are happening all over the country. I have colleagues who are live streaming services from their homes in one city to a synagogue in another city because that other synagogue doesn't have a rabbi. In Los Angeles and New York, there are massive communal shofar blasts that are happening throughout the city, all at the same time. So the Jews are filling the air with blasts from the shofar. Now, the reason why all of us jumped on this so quickly is because we as a people were made for this moment. We are the ever-adapting, ever-evolving, ever-innovating people. We were immediately teaching ourselves to live underwater. We did it because it is in our DNA. This is what we as Jews have always done. The way that we have either adapted to black swan events or we have created black swan events ourselves is simply nothing short of amazing. The most important reaction to a black swan event in Jewish history was when, nearly 2,000 years ago, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said to then General, soon-to-be Emperor Vespasian, when he was responsible for destroying Jerusalem, Rabbi Yochanan said to him, "Give me Yavna and her sages. Ten li Yavna v'chachmeha." The rabbi knew in that moment that if he couldn't have the physical temple, we could still learn Torah. We could still have acts of chesed. We could still have home ritual. And this would power the Jews throughout thousands of years of exile. And then, 1,700 years later, there was another black swan event. There was the arrival of the Baal Shem Tov. Nobody could have predicted this, that after decades of pogroms that killed hundreds of thousands of Jews in Eastern Europe and the apostasy of the false Messiah Shabbatai Tzvi, which crushed the spirits of millions, the Jews of Eastern Europe could again hold their heads high. But this humble rabbi, the Baal Shem Tov, who was a mystic, taught us that we could worship God through melody and dance. And he taught us that a connection to God belonged to everyone, the blacksmith and the shoemaker. It was a spiritual revolution that changed the Jewish world. And almost simultaneously, just a few decades later, not knowing of each other, on the other side of Europe in Germany, Moses Mendelssohn's publication of Jerusalem had a different kind of black swan impact. He taught German Jews that they could hold on to a Jewish identity and Western philosophy at the same time. And this intellectual revolution paved the way for Jewish citizenship in Europe. It opened the door to the flowering Reform and conservative and modern Orthodox Judaism. All three of these black swan events could have never been predicted until after the fact, and they all change the trajectory of our people's story. The story of the Jewish people is the story of one black swan after another. We are constantly teaching ourselves to live underwater. We are the people of the black swan. We are the people who make religious rulings for how to live Jewishly, even under the Nazis. We are the people who created art, even in concentration camps. And why do we do this? We do this because we believe in an ever-renewing covenant with God and an ever-relevant and ever-renewing Torah. But let me tell you, my friends, Torah does not renew itself. We have to do it. That is our mission. We read last week on Shabbat in Parshat Nitzavim that God says to all of us, I make this covenant and this promise not with you alone, but those who are standing here with us today and those who are not here with us this day. Our Torah, the greatest gift of the Jewish people, is something that we must continue to pass from one person to another, from one generation to another. Torah is not just the 5 books that's in the Torah scroll. It's the sacred teaching of all of our teachings. From Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, from in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, to your grandmother's kugel recipe. It's all Torah. And it all needs a host to live in, and we are its host. Our mission is to make Torah the real virus, but not a virus of death and suffering. We need to create a virus of life and vitality through Torah. It can give us a way to live, a comfort in our darkest hour, a means to celebrate when we have joy. If we are constantly adapting ourselves, we will learn to bring Jewish celebration and Jewish living into our lives. And then we can truly say about Torah, Derachecha darchei noam, v'chol nativoteha shalom, her ways are pleasant ways. All of her paths are peaceful paths. Eitz chayim hi lamachazikim ba v'tomcheha meushar. She is a tree of life to all that hold on to her. Everybody who holds on to her is happy. Bechol dor vador, in each and every generation, we need to find new ways to innovate. In each and every generation, we need to find ways to adapt to the next black swan, or we need to create the black swan and change our reality. When Rabbi Yochanan asked for Yavna and her sages, he could have never imagined how yeshivot and Jewish schools would be everywhere on this planet, on every continent except Antarctica, teaching the very Talmud that Rabbi Yochanan was only dreaming of. When Moses Mendelssohn paved a way for Jews to live in the modern world, he could have never imagined the Reform movement's Debbie Friedman, the vibrancy of Ramah camps, or seeing modern Orthodox Jews practicing a religious life while fully integrated into every modern profession in the world. And when the Baal Shem Tov was an itinerant mystic, there's no way he could have imagined Chabad emissaries in every city on earth lighting giant menorahs in public squares. And these future events from the black swans of the past didn't happen just because of the leaders in the history books. No, they happened because hundreds of thousands of families, like you and like me, also chose Jewish innovation. So if you are watching this streaming, I'm so glad you are here. I'm so grateful you didn't take this year off. I'm so glad and just happy that we are taking time to celebrate Rosh HaShanah apart but together. But let me share something. Watching Judaism on a screen is not going to be enough adaptation. Together, we are going to need to think of new ways to think about how do we truly live underwater, as that story went. How will we make the best of Jewish living? And how will we make Judaism continue to come alive as we continue? How will we create the best in human connections? How will we raise up the downtrodden? How will we teach Torah to ourselves and our children during this? How will we teach ourselves to bless one another even when we can't be in the same physical space as one another? How will we teach ourselves to, each and every one of us, cry out in agony to our Creator? How will we teach ourselves to sing and to dance with joy? How will we teach ourselves to fight against injustice from 6 feet apart? That's innovation for Jewish living. That's facing the black swan events with vitality. That is teaching ourselves to swim and to live underwater, because we are the black swan experts. And as we again continue to figure out how to live underwater, we can also be guides. We can help. We can be partners to all of our neighbors, because they are striving for the same new realities, and they want the same things we want. This is what the whole world is looking for. The world, I believe, wants to connect. It wants to celebrate. It wants to bless and be blessed. And our mission is to help us all achieve this. Shana Tova.